The rhythmic drumming of the rain against the windowpane usually soothed Daniel. Tonight, however, each drop felt like a tiny hammer blow against his skull. He sat hunched in his armchair, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating his face in the otherwise darkened room. He'd been working late, a tedious project that had been dragging on for weeks, a welcome distraction from the gnawing unease that had settled in his gut. He decided to take a quick break, a mindless scroll through the labyrinthine corridors of the internet, a digital escape from the spreadsheets and deadlines that haunted his waking hours. That's when he found it. It wasn't anything obvious, nothing that screamed infidelity. It was a link, buried deep within a forum he rarely visited. A live stream with a thumbnail that showed only a woman's silhouette against a softly blurred background. Something about it, a subtle tremor in his intuition, compelled him to click. He told himself it was curiosity, a harmless diversion. But deep down, a cold dread was beginning to creep into his bones. The stream loaded slowly, the buffering icon spinning in the center of the screen, each rotation amplifying the thumping in his chest. Then the image resolved. A dimly lit room, soft lighting casting long shadows. A woman sat on a plush sofa, her back to the camera. Her hair, the same shade of warm chestnut that he adored, cascaded down her shoulders. And then she spoke. It was Sarah. Her voice, usually so familiar, so comforting, held a melody he hadn't heard in years. It was a lightness, a playfulness that had been absent from their conversations, from their shared moments, for what felt like an eternity. She was laughing, a genuine, unrestrained sound that pierced through the fog of his confusion. She was talking to someone just off-screen, her tone intimate, laced with an affection that made his stomach clench. He couldn't see who she was talking to, only hear the low murmur of a male voice in response. He felt a strange detachment, as if he were watching a scene from a movie, a drama unfolding before his eyes, but one in which he had no part. He watched, transfixed, as Sarah leaned forward, her silhouette shifting in the soft light. He could almost feel the warmth of her skin, the scent of her perfume, the familiar weight of her hand in his. But she wasn't reaching for him. She was reaching for someone else. The camera angle shifted slightly, revealing the other person in the room. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. It was Mark. Mark, his colleague, his supposed friend. The man he'd shared countless lunches with, the man he'd trusted with confidential projects, the man he'd even invited to their home for dinner just last month. The laughter, the shared glances, the casual touch of a hand on a knee. It was all there, laid bare in the cold, sterile light of the live stream. It was a betrayal so profound, so complete, that it felt like a physical blow. The stream continued, but Daniel barely registered what they were saying. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion, disbelief, and a rising tide of anger. He felt numb, disconnected from his own body. He watched them, these two people he thought he knew so well, as if they were strangers. The rain outside intensified, mirroring the storm raging inside him. He felt like the world had tilted on its axis, leaving him stranded in a landscape he no longer recognized. The comfortable, familiar life he had built, the life he had cherished, was crumbling before his eyes, reduced to a grainy image on a computer screen. The live stream flickered and died, leaving Daniel staring at a blank screen. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply sat there, the image of Sarah and Mark seared into his mind. It wasn't just the physical act of betrayal that cut him to the core. It was the casual intimacy, the easy camaraderie, the shared laughter that spoke of a connection he hadn't suspected, a bond forged in secret, hidden from his view. It was the realization that the woman he loved, the woman he had vowed to spend his life with, had been living a double life, a life that excluded him, a life built on a foundation of lies. He thought of their life together, the years they had shared, the dreams they had built, the quiet evenings at home, the weekend trips, the shared jokes, the plans for the future. All of it now seemed tainted, poisoned by this revelation. He replayed their interactions in his mind, searching for clues, for any hint of the deception that had been unfolding beneath the surface. Had he been blind? How could he have missed it? Had their smiles been fake? Their embraces empty? The questions swirled in his head, each one a sharp jab of pain. He felt a wave of nausea rise in his throat. He stumbled to the bathroom, his reflection in the mirror a stranger pale, drawn. His eyes filled with a mixture of shock and disbelief. He splashed cold water on his face, trying to shake himself out of the daze. But the image of Sarah and Mark remained, burned into his retina, a constant reminder of the betrayal. He returned to the living room, his gaze drawn back to the laptop. He wanted to erase the image from his mind, to pretend it hadn't happened. But he couldn't. The truth was out there, raw and undeniable. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were observing his own life from a distance, a spectator in a play he didn't understand. He was no longer the husband, the partner, the man Sarah had promised to love and cherish. He was the fool, the cuckold, the one left in the dark. He closed the laptop, the click echoing in the silence. He couldn't stay in the apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of their shared life. He grabbed his coat and keys and walked out into the rain, the coldness a welcome contrast to the burning anger inside him. He walked aimlessly, the city lights blurring through the rain-streaked windows, the sounds of the city a distant hum. He didn't know where he was going, what he was going to do. He only knew that he couldn't go back to the life he had before. That life was gone, shattered into a million pieces, leaving him adrift in a sea of pain and confusion. He needed time to process, to understand, to come to terms with what had happened. But one thing was certain. His life would never be the same. The rain continued to fall, washing away the remnants of the day, but it couldn't wash away the image that was etched into his memory. The image of his wife, laughing in the arms of another man. The rain had stopped, leaving a glistening sheen on the cobblestone streets. Daniel found himself in a dimly lit park, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. He sat on a damp bench, the cold seeping through his clothes. He felt a strange sense of calm descend upon him, a numbness that replaced the initial shock and anger. He was exhausted, emotionally drained. He closed his eyes, trying to clear his mind, to find some semblance of order in the chaos that had engulfed him. He thought of Mark. Mark, the colleague, the friend, the betrayer. He remembered their conversations, their shared jokes, the times they had confided in each other. He had trusted Mark, had considered him an ally. Now that trust felt like a cruel joke. He had been deceived, manipulated, made a fool of. The anger returned, a burning ember in his chest. He thought of Sarah. Sarah, his wife, his lover, his confidant. He remembered the day they met, the spark of attraction, the whirlwind romance. He remembered their wedding day, the vows they had exchanged, the promises they had made. He had loved her, had given her his heart, his trust, his life. And she had betrayed him, had thrown it all away for another man. The pain was a sharp, piercing ache in his chest. He opened his eyes, the world coming back into focus. He saw the trees swaying in the wind, the empty playground, the distant lights of the city. He saw the beauty of the world, the resilience of nature, the enduring spirit of humanity. And he realized that he couldn't let this betrayal destroy him. He couldn't let Sarah and Mark win. He had to fight back. He didn't know what form that fight would take, but he knew he wouldn't let them get away with it. He wouldn't let them break him. He would find a way to make them pay, to make them feel the pain they had inflicted on him. He would reclaim his life, his dignity, his self-respect. He would rise from the ashes of this betrayal, stronger, more determined, more resilient than ever before. He stood up, the numbness receding, replaced by a steely resolve. He would not be a victim. He would not be defined by this betrayal. He would take control, he would seek justice, he would have his revenge. He walked out of the park, the city lights beckoning him forward. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he wouldn't face it alone. He had friends, family, a support network that would help him through this. He would lean on them, he would draw strength from them. He would emerge from this ordeal a changed man, but a better man. The first step was to confront Sarah, to hear her explanation, to understand how this could have happened. But that was a conversation for another day. For now, he needed to find a place to rest, to gather his thoughts, to plan his next move. The night was still young, and the city held endless possibilities. The apartment felt like a tomb. Every object, every piece of furniture, every photograph seemed to mock him, whispering accusations of his blindness, his naivete. He couldn't bear to be surrounded by the remnants of their shared life, the tangible reminders of a love that now felt like a cruel illusion. He packed a bag, throwing in clothes and toiletries with a sense of detachment, as if he were preparing for a trip he didn't want to take. He left a note on the kitchen counter, a simple message, "Gone. Need time." He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay there, in that space that had once been a sanctuary, now a prison of his own making. He drove aimlessly, the city lights a blur through the rain-streaked windshield. He ended up at a nondescript motel on the outskirts of town, a place where anonymity was assured, where questions weren't asked. He checked in, the clerk barely glancing at him, and retreated to the sterile anonymity of his room. He sat on the edge of the bed, the silence pressing in on him. He felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him, the emotional turmoil of the day taking its toll. He lay down, fully clothed, and closed his eyes, but sleep eluded him. The image of Sarah and Mark, entwined in each other's arms, played on a loop in his mind, a constant reminder of his betrayal. He reached for his phone, the screen illuminating his face in the darkness. He scrolled through his contacts, hesitating over Sarah's name. He wanted to call her, to demand an explanation, to unleash the fury that was building inside him. But he knew it wasn't the time. He needed to be calm, to be rational, to think clearly. He couldn't let his emotions dictate his actions. He put the phone down, the screen fading to black. He got up and went to the window, looking out at the deserted parking lot. The rain had stopped, leaving a glistening sheen on the asphalt. He saw a lone figure walking across the lot, head bowed against the wind. He wondered about that person's life, their story, their struggles. He wondered if they had ever experienced the pain of betrayal, the shattering of trust, the loss of love. He felt a connection to that stranger, a shared sense of vulnerability, of being adrift in a world that seemed indifferent to their suffering. He turned away from the window, the room closing in on him again. He needed a distraction, something to take his mind off his own troubles. He turned on the TV, flipping through the channels, but nothing held his attention. He was restless, agitated, unable to find peace. He paced the room, his thoughts racing, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He felt trapped, caged like an animal caught in a snare. He needed to escape, to find a way out of this labyrinth of pain and confusion. He went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face, trying to regain some semblance of control. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, the harsh fluorescent light revealing the lines of stress etched on his face. He was a stranger to himself, a man he no longer recognized. He had lost his bearings, his sense of self. He needed to find his way back, to reclaim his identity, to rebuild his life. But where do you start when the foundation of your world has crumbled? He didn't have the answers, but he knew he had to find them. He had to start somewhere, somehow. The night was long, and the road ahead was uncertain. But he knew he couldn't give up. He had to keep moving forward, one step at a time. The motel room, with its faded wallpaper and stale cigarette smell, became Daniel's temporary refuge. He spent the next few days in a haze of numbness, moving between the bed and the small, grimy bathroom, barely eating or sleeping. He watched the world go by through the window, the flow of traffic on the highway a constant reminder of the passage of time, a time that seemed to stand still for him. He was trapped in a bubble of his own pain, unable to escape the memories that haunted him. He tried to distract himself, to find some way to fill the emptiness that gnawed at him. He watched television, the flickering images a meaningless stream of light and sound. He tried to read, but the words blurred on the page, his mind unable to focus. He even tried to work, his laptop a lifeline to the familiar world of spreadsheets and deadlines, but the effort was futile. His concentration was shattered, his thoughts constantly returning to Sarah and Mark. He couldn't shake the image of them together, their laughter echoing in his ears. He saw them everywhere he looked, in the faces of strangers, in the couples walking hand in hand on the street, in the intimate scenes on television. He was haunted by the memory of their betrayal, the knowledge that the woman he loved had chosen another man. He felt a deep sense of injustice, a burning anger that refused to be extinguished. He had been wronged, betrayed, humiliated. He had given Sarah his heart, his trust, his life, and she had repaid him with deceit and infidelity. He couldn't understand it, couldn't comprehend how she could have done this to him. He wrestled with his emotions, the anger vying with the pain, the desire for revenge battling with the lingering love he still felt for Sarah. He knew he couldn't go back to the life they had shared, that the trust was irrevocably broken. But he also knew he couldn't simply walk away, couldn't let them get away with what they had done. He needed to do something, to take action, to reclaim his power. He couldn't let them define him, couldn't let their betrayal be the final chapter of his story. He had to find a way to fight back, to make them pay for the pain they had caused him. But what could he do? What kind of revenge would be sufficient to balance the scales, to restore his sense of justice? He didn't want to resort to violence, to stoop to their level. He wanted something more subtle, more sophisticated, something that would cut them to the core, that would expose their deceit and leave them with nothing. He began to think, to plan, to strategize. He would use their own weapons against them, their own deceit and betrayal. He would turn the tables, expose their secrets, and destroy their lives. He would become the puppet master, pulling the strings, orchestrating their downfall. He knew it wouldn't be easy, that it would require patience, cunning, and a ruthless determination. But he was ready for the challenge. He had nothing left to lose. He had been stripped bare, reduced to his essence. And from the ashes of his pain, a new resolve was born. He would have his revenge. The seed of revenge, once planted, took root in Daniel's mind, growing with a ferocity that surprised even him. He was no longer the man who had passively accepted his fate, the man who had retreated into the anonymity of a motel room. He was a man on a mission, driven by a single-minded purpose. He would not rest until he had exacted his revenge, until he had made Sarah and Mark pay for their betrayal. He began to research, his laptop his weapon of choice. He delved into the dark corners of the internet, learning about online anonymity, encryption, and the art of digital manipulation. He became a student of the virtual world, mastering the tools that would allow him to operate in the shadows, unseen, untraceable. He learned how to create fake identities, how to mask his IP address, how to leave no digital footprint. He became a ghost in the machine, a phantom operating in the digital ether. He started by gathering information, piecing together the puzzle of Sarah and Mark's affair. He hacked into their email accounts, reading their intimate messages, their secret plans, their declarations of love. He monitored their social media activity, tracking their movements, their interactions, their lies. He learned about their friends, their families, their colleagues, building a detailed map of their lives. He discovered that their affair was no secret among their social circle. Several of their friends knew, had even encouraged it, their silence a tacit endorsement of their betrayal. Daniel felt a surge of anger, a wave of betrayal that washed over him. They had all conspired against him, had betrayed his trust, had mocked his love. They were all complicit in his pain. He expanded his research, delving into the lives of their friends, their families, their colleagues. He uncovered secrets, lies, hidden agendas. He found evidence of infidelity, financial misdeeds, and personal betrayals. He compiled a dossier of information, a digital arsenal that he would use to dismantle their lives, to expose their hypocrisy, to bring them down. He became obsessed, spending hours poring over data, analyzing patterns, connecting the dots. He was like a detective, piecing together a complex case, determined to bring the perpetrators to justice. He was no longer the victim, the cuckold, the fool. He was the hunter, the predator, the one in control. He felt a sense of power, a thrill of anticipation. He was no longer the passive observer, the man who had been blindsided by betrayal. He was the architect of his own destiny, the master of his own fate. He would use his knowledge, his skills, his determination to exact his revenge. He would make them pay, not just for their betrayal of him, but for their betrayal of trust, of friendship, of love. He would expose their secrets, shatter their illusions, and leave them with nothing but the ashes of their deceit. Daniel's plan began to take shape, a dark masterpiece of calculated revenge. He wouldn't resort to violence, to crude acts of physical retribution. His revenge would be far more sophisticated, more insidious, more devastating. He would use their own weaknesses against them, their own secrets as weapons. He would turn their world upside down, expose their hypocrisy, and leave them with nothing but the bitter taste of regret. He started with Mark. He knew that Mark was ambitious, that he valued his career above all else. So, Daniel decided to strike at the heart of his professional life. He anonymously leaked confidential information about Mark's past, damaging documents that revealed questionable business practices and ethical lapses. He posted these documents on industry forums, sent them to Mark's superiors, and even alerted the press. The effect was immediate and devastating. Mark's reputation was tarnished, his career hanging by a thread. He became embroiled in investigations, his colleagues distancing themselves, his superiors questioning his integrity. The once rising star was now a pariah, his future uncertain. Daniel watched Mark's downfall with a cold satisfaction. He saw the fear in Mark's eyes, the desperation in his actions. He saw the once confident man crumble under the weight of his own secrets, his carefully constructed facade shattered. It was a taste of what was to come, a prelude to the symphony of destruction that Daniel was composing. Next, he turned his attention to their friends, the enablers, the ones who had turned a blind eye to the affair, who had even encouraged it. He used the information he had gathered, their own secrets, their own vulnerabilities, to sow discord and mistrust. He sent anonymous emails, created fake social media accounts, and planted rumors. He exposed their infidelities, their financial troubles, their hidden addictions. He turned them against each other, their friendships fracturing, their trust shattered. Their once tight-knit social circle imploded, leaving them isolated and vulnerable. Daniel reveled in the chaos he created, the web of deceit he spun. He was the puppet master, pulling the strings, orchestrating their downfall. He watched as their lives unraveled, their relationships crumbled, their reputations tarnished. He saw the fear in their eyes, the desperation in their actions. They had betrayed him, had condoned his wife's infidelity, and now they were paying the price. But his ultimate target was Sarah. He saved her for last, wanting to savor the moment, to prolong her suffering. He watched her from afar, observing her routines, her habits, her weaknesses. He learned her schedule, her fears, her insecurities. He wanted to strike at the heart of her world, to inflict the maximum amount of pain, to make her understand the depth of her betrayal. He was patient, biding his time, waiting for the right moment. He knew that revenge was a dish best served cold, that the anticipation would only heighten the impact. He was like a predator stalking its prey, circling, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. And when that moment came, he would be ready. Daniel's meticulous planning extended beyond the digital realm. He knew that to truly break Sarah, he needed to strike at her emotional core, at the things she held most dear. He began to subtly manipulate her reality, planting seeds of doubt and suspicion in her mind. He would leave anonymous gifts at her doorstep, a single red rose, a book she had mentioned wanting, a piece of jewelry that resembled something she had admired. These gestures, seemingly romantic, were designed to unsettle her, to make her question her relationship with Mark, to sow discord in their newfound happiness. He started sending her cryptic messages, and signed notes that hinted at his knowledge of their affair, that alluded to her deepest fears and insecurities. He would leave these notes in places where she would find them, tucked into her purse, slipped under her pillow, hidden in her car. Each message was a subtle jab, a reminder that someone was watching, that her secret was not as safe as she thought. He began to manipulate her environment, creating subtle disruptions in her daily routine. He would tamper with her car, causing minor malfunctions that would leave her stranded and vulnerable. He would arrange for deliveries to be sent to her workplace, addressed to Mrs. Mark's last name, forcing her to confront the reality of her situation in public. He would make phone calls to her home, hanging up just as she answered, leaving her with a sense of unease, a feeling of being watched. He played a game of cat and mouse, always staying one step ahead, always maintaining his anonymity. He was a phantom, a shadow lurking in the background, his presence felt but never seen. He enjoyed the power he wielded, the control he exerted over her life. He saw the fear in her eyes, the confusion in her actions. He saw the cracks appearing in her facade, the once confident woman now plagued by doubt and insecurity. He knew that his actions were cruel, that he was inflicting pain on the woman he once loved. But he couldn't stop. The desire for revenge consumed him, fueled by the injustice he had suffered. He wanted her to feel the same pain he had felt, the same sense of betrayal, the same loss of trust. He was no longer the man she knew, the kind, gentle husband who had adored her. He was a stranger, a force of nature, driven by a primal need for retribution. He would not rest until he had broken her, until he had stripped her of everything she held dear. He would make her pay for her sins, for her betrayal, for the destruction of their love. Daniel's campaign of psychological warfare against Sarah intensified. He escalated his tactics, moving from subtle manipulations to more overt acts of disruption. He hacked into her social media accounts, posting compromising photos and messages, revealing her affair to the world. He sent anonymous emails to her friends and family, detailing her infidelity, painting her as a deceitful and manipulative woman. He even contacted her employer, anonymously reporting her for misconduct, jeopardizing her career. He watched as her world crumbled around her. Her friends distanced themselves, her family expressed their disappointment, her colleagues whispered behind her back. She became a social pariah, ostracized and shunned. Her once bright reputation was tarnished, her name synonymous with betrayal and deceit. Daniel saw the toll his actions were taking on her. The vibrant, confident woman he had once known was gone, replaced by a shadow of her former self. She was withdrawn, anxious, her eyes filled with a haunting fear. He knew he was breaking her, but he couldn't stop. The thirst for revenge was insatiable, a burning fire that consumed him. He wanted her to suffer, to experience the same pain he had endured. He wanted her to understand the consequences of her actions, the devastation she had wrought. He wanted her to regret the day she had betrayed him, the day she had chosen another man over him. He continued his relentless pursuit, pushing her to the brink. He hacked into her bank accounts, draining her savings, leaving her financially vulnerable. He tampered with her apartment, creating a sense of unease, a feeling of being violated. He even hired a private investigator to follow her, to document her every move, to gather evidence of her infidelity. He was obsessed, consumed by his desire for revenge. He spent every waking moment plotting, scheming, manipulating. He was no longer the man he had been, the kind, gentle husband who had loved Sarah unconditionally. He was a stranger to himself, a dark reflection of the man he once was. He knew that his actions were destroying him, that he was losing himself in the pursuit of revenge. But he couldn't stop. He was trapped in a cycle of pain and anger, driven by a primal need for retribution. He would not rest until he had broken Sarah completely, until he had exacted his ultimate revenge. Daniel, now operating in a world devoid of moral boundaries, decided to expand his web of retribution. He recognized that Sarah and Mark's families, though oblivious to the affair, played a role in shaping the individuals who had caused him such immense pain. He reasoned that they, too, bore some responsibility for the choices their children had made. He began subtly infiltrating their lives, using his honed skills of manipulation and deception. He started with Sarah's parents, a seemingly loving couple who doted on their daughter. He anonymously sent them packages, seemingly innocent gifts that held a darker meaning. A book on dealing with infidelity, a self-help guide for overcoming betrayal, a DVD of a film about a family torn apart by lies and deceit. He planted seeds of doubt in their minds, making them question their daughter's character, her choices, her happiness. He then turned his attention to Mark's family. He learned that Mark's father was a respected businessman, a pillar of the community. Daniel, using a fabricated identity, contacted him with a lucrative business proposal, a scheme that was just plausible enough to pique his interest, but ultimately destined to fail. He watched as Mark's father invested his time, his resources, his reputation in the venture, only to see it crumble before his eyes, leaving him financially and emotionally devastated. Daniel derived a perverse satisfaction from observing the collateral damage he inflicted. He saw the confusion, the hurt, the betrayal in the eyes of Sarah and Mark's families. He knew he was causing them pain, but he justified his actions as a necessary evil, a means to an end. He believed that they needed to understand the consequences of their children's actions, the ripple effect of their betrayal. He was no longer simply seeking revenge on Sarah and Mark. He was waging a war against their entire world, their families, their friends, their colleagues, anyone who had played a role, however small, in enabling their affair. He was a one-man army, determined to destroy everything they held dear, to leave them with nothing but the ashes of their former lives. He was consumed by his mission, driven by a relentless obsession. He had crossed the line, venturing into a territory where there was no turning back. He was no longer the man he once was, the kind, compassionate husband who had loved Sarah with all his heart. He was a stranger, a monster, fueled by a thirst for revenge that knew no bounds. While orchestrating the downfall of those around Sarah and Mark, Daniel never lost sight of his primary target. He continued to observe Sarah, studying her like a scientist observing a lab rat. He watched as she struggled to cope with the fallout of his actions, the isolation, the fear, the uncertainty. He saw the light fade from her eyes, the spark of joy extinguished. He knew the time was approaching for his final act of revenge, the culmination of his meticulous planning and ruthless execution. He wanted to make it count, to leave a lasting impression, to ensure that she would never forget the pain he had inflicted. He decided to create a website, a digital monument to her betrayal. He called it the Sarah Chronicles, a cruel parody of her life. He filled it with evidence of her affair, screenshots of her intimate conversations with Mark, photos of them together, testimonies from those he had manipulated into turning against her. He spared no detail, no matter how intimate or humiliating. He designed the website with a single purpose: to destroy her reputation, to expose her secrets to the world, to make her a pariah. He wanted everyone she knew, everyone she had ever met, to see her for what she truly was, a deceitful and manipulative woman who had betrayed her husband, her friends, her family. He worked tirelessly on the website, pouring all his energy and focus into its creation. He spent hours crafting the perfect narrative, selecting the most damning evidence, ensuring that every detail was meticulously presented. He wanted it to be a masterpiece of destruction, a testament to his pain and his anger. He knew that once he launched the website, there would be no turning back. It would be the final nail in her coffin, the ultimate act of revenge. He would be unleashing a force that would consume her, leaving her with nothing but the ashes of her former life. He savored the anticipation, the knowledge that he held her fate in his hands. He was the puppet master, the architect of her downfall. He would watch as her world crumbled, as her reputation shattered, as she paid the price for her betrayal. He was ready. Daniel chose the date for the website launch with a cruel precision: their wedding anniversary. It was a date that had once held so much meaning, a symbol of their love and commitment. Now it would be forever tainted, a reminder of her betrayal and his revenge. He spent the days leading up to the launch in a state of heightened anticipation. He finalized the website, adding the finishing touches, ensuring that every detail was perfect. He checked and rechecked his work, obsessed with making it flawless, a testament to his dedication to destroying Sarah. He imagined her reaction, the shock, the horror, the despair. He pictured her scrolling through the pages, reading the intimate details of her affair, seeing the evidence of her betrayal laid bare for all to see. He relished the thought of her pain, the knowledge that he was the one inflicting it. He also anticipated the reactions of others, their friends, their families, their colleagues. He imagined them clicking on the link, their faces contorting in disbelief and disgust as they read about Sarah's infidelity. He pictured them gossiping, whispering behind her back, judging her, condemning her. He knew that the website would cause a firestorm, that it would spread like wildfire through their social circles. He had created a weapon of mass destruction, a digital bomb that would explode in their lives, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. He was ready to unleash it. On the morning of their anniversary, he woke with a sense of calm determination. He had done everything he could to prepare, to ensure that his plan would succeed. He had no doubts, no regrets. He was driven by a single-minded purpose, to make Sarah pay for her betrayal. He sat at his computer, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Then, with a single click, he launched the website. The Sarah Chronicles was live.